look, if you will, in Mark 10 again. And right after what I read is the next story, Mark 10, verse 35. We'll continue on. James and John, the sons of Zebedee, approached him, and they said, "Teacher, we want you to do whatever we ask you." And Jesus said, "What do you want me to do for you?" And they answered him, "Allow us to sit at your right and at your left in your glory." And Jesus said, "You don't know what you're asking. Are you able to drink the cup I drink, or to be baptized with the baptism I'm baptized with?" And they said, "We are able." And Jesus told them, "You will drink the cup I drink, and you'll be baptized with the baptism I'm baptized with. But to sit at my right or left is not mine to give. Instead, it is for those for whom it has been prepared." And when the 10 disciples heard this, they began to be indignant with James and John. Jesus called them over and said to them, and I'll stop there because we'll get to that in a moment. So here we're reminded that leadership by the flesh has two mantras. We want, or we are able. We want as a coalition. I want as an agenda. And James and John were rushing ahead saying, "We want this." How different it could have been if they said, "Lord, what do you want?" I like what the authors say here. They say coalitions built on the shaky pillars of we want and we are able produce conflict. What a mess along this road to Jerusalem, and how this kind of mess has permeated the church. Church politics, power plays, informal and institutional hierarchies, the never-ending jockeying for glory and position is pervasive in the church. And that's why Jesus stopped in his tracks, called the men to himself, and revealed to them the principle of leadership within his kingdom. So now let's go back to that passage in Mark 10 again. In Mark 10, picking up in verse 42, when the disciples have heard what James and John have done, they're indignant. And Jesus hears them. And then he says these words. Jesus called them over and said to them, "You know that those who are regarded as rulers of the Gentiles lord it over them, and those in high positions act as tyrants over them. But it is not so among you. On the contrary, whoever wants to become great among you will be your servant, and whoever wants to be first among you will be a slave to all. For even the Son of Man did not come to be served, but to serve and to give his life as a ransom for many." 4 words I want you to zero in on. Not so among you. Go back and look at that again in verse 43. But it is not so among you. And then he begins to talk about servant leadership, of which he's the example and the model of. It reminds me of what Peter wrote in his first epistle, 1 Peter 5. Peter said, "I exhort the elders among you as a fellow elder and witness to the sufferings of Christ." He didn't play the apostle card. He said, "I exhort the elders as a fellow elder and witness to the sufferings of Christ, as well as one who shares in the glory about to be revealed. Shepherd God's flock among you, not overseeing out of compulsion, but willingly, as God would have you, not out of greed for money, but eagerly, not lording it over." Remember, Jesus said the Gentiles do that? "Not lording it over those entrusted to you, but being examples to the flock. And when the chief shepherd appears, you will receive the unfading crown of glory." Another quote from Christ in Church Leadership book. The authors say Jesus shares a revolutionary vision, a new vision in Mark 10. He begins with the words, "But it is not so among you." Now, Jesus did not say, "But it should not be so among you." Nor did he say, "Take all precaution to guard against this, lest it become so among you." But rather he said, "It's not so among you." Why did he say this? Why is this? It's because we already have our lead man, Jesus Christ. He's in charge, even when we do everything we can to overlook this fact. With Christ in charge, the whole issue of power and position is forever settled. He holds all power and authority over all things on earth and in heaven. All authority belongs to Him. We are simply called upon to serve Him and do His will. All that to say this: biblical leadership is following Jesus. Now, I know that that's simple, but it's also profound. Someone once said that now you're intelligent if you're able to state the obvious, because we live in an age where we forget the obvious. The obvious is biblical leadership is about following Jesus. You see, our journey of following Christ means allowing Him to serve and lead through us. We can permit no thoughts about politics, power, personal achievement, glory, or legacy. It's all about Him and what He wants. He must be enough, and His desires must be ours. As soon as we entertain the "we want" or "we are able" mantras, we've taken our eyes off our lead man. Leadership is leadership on its knees, kneeling in prayer, humbly submitting to God's will. That's what biblical leadership is. So let's go back for a minute and revisit Jesus on His way to Jerusalem. As I started a few minutes ago, when you read the first part there of Mark 10, Jesus is leading the way, and they're following along behind Him. He's got His face set toward Jerusalem. He knows what's going to go down. He warns them, the Son of Man's going to be handed over. He's going to be killed, but on the third day He will rise again. He knew exactly what He was going to face. How could He lead so well? I think the secret to Jesus' leadership is revealed in another verse, going back to a different scene in His earthly ministry. The verse I'm thinking of is John 5, verse 19. The Gospel of John 5:19. Jesus was speaking, and He made this statement. He said, "Truly I tell you, the Son is not able to do anything on His own, but only what He sees the Father doing. For whatever the Father does, the Son likewise does these things." Do you want to know why Jesus was so effective as a leader? And why? Yes, He's the Son of God, but more than that, when you look at the tactical part of His life, how did He do everything so well? He had a relationship with His Father, and whatever His Father did, that's what He did. There's definitely a lesson in that. Jesus still walks on ahead of us today, leading the way. The fact that He leads has not changed. Our job is to follow, eyes fixed on our lead man, leading on our knees and looking for opportunities to serve. It's definitely a good read. But enough of that. That was just setting the table. So let's look tonight at this question of how does a plurality of elders function. And let's dive into the Scriptures and let's look at an actual, real-life, practical example. And the one that stands out head and shoulders above the rest is Acts 15. In the book of Acts, in chapter 15, you have a landmark moment in the timeline history of the early church. We know that when Jesus died and rose again, He purchased our salvation. He gave the Great Commission to His disciples to preach the gospel to every creature, make disciples of all nations. And then He told them right before He went up into the clouds, He says, wait for the Holy Spirit.